Okay, how about we'll just we'll approve the meeting minutes from December 1st at our next meeting, along with the meeting minutes from today's meeting. And then additions to the agenda. Are there any suggested additions to the agenda? No. So we're going to have a discussion with Josh Flowers. Josh, did you get the list of all of the questions that we had for you? It was
Yes,
quite
thank
a
you.
lengthy list. So I'm gonna kind of hand things over to you to go over. My guess is going through the process, and then we can then address any questions that are not answered by your initial discussion.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I guess the easiest thing to do, because I read through the list, and a lot of it is kind of, I guess, the logistics, if you will, of how you'd go through everything from start to finish. The long or the short, to summarize it briefly, is essentially per town charter. You know, the MBC, and I'm going to say we are, and by we are I mean the MBC, are involved at even the conception of projects. And what we've really tried to do, as some of you know, like even through that last library project, is develop a process which is the right way to kind of approach any capital project for that matter. So, and that is where you go out with an RFP for services. Within that RFP, that's a request for proposal. And that's where you define exactly what you need. So it could be something as simple as, say, in your case, it could be like, you know, reviewing the existing building. It could be a complete programmatic thing. It could be a whole brand new library, like you did last time. And how that works is we, meaning the NBC, help write it with you. We're kind of like the nuts and bolts of the process. You guys are the users, you're the program. So the best way to kind of explain this or really summarize it is take the school project, because that's what's going on currently. The Board of Ed is the program. Within that Board of Ed, or you have Dr. Burrill as superintendent, you have Dan Caldwell, facilities, you have PTA, you have various user groups that use it. So you have different departments that use it. You have, so all those people develop the program, and the MBC just helps organize and develop the process. Now, the person kind of that is in between us is typically the architect. They're the ones that, you would hire to organize this, have all these user group meetings, go through program with you, just like we did the last time with Doyle Coffin for the library. They're the ones that do all the organization, update it, come up with feasibility studies, come up with cost proposals, come up with the what ifs, the what could be's, your wish lists, everything, and then report back to everybody in the town, but mainly to your board, saying, okay, we took all the data, we put it all together, we figured it out, here's what you have. So in speaking, because I've, again, just kind of going down this list quickly, speaking, say, in this term, it would be, okay, here's if we were to, and I know you've gone through this a few times, but if we were going to renovate the existing building, here's what we're going to be in for. Let's say we take over center. Well, here would be a variety of options of how to do that and the cost proposals associated with it that meet your program. Within your program, you might have some, or you probably will have some must-haves, would be nice-to-haves, and dream list items. So, like, here's, how we can fit those in or not fit those in, and here are the cost implications. Here is an implication the cost if we leave the gym for Parks and Rec, rebuild the rest. Here's a portion if we just renovate this side. Here's a portion if we do half and half. Here's a estimate if we just raise the whole building and build new. So that's really the architect's role. And that's why it's so important to actually do the RFP process the correct way, because then you're getting a known set of deliverables that they're going to be responsible for. Now, this town in the past has used this process and not used this process. And when we've used it and done it the right way, we have successful projects. The first time that Cadigan went out, they did not do it. Parks and Rec just started going forth, and they tried to put it up. It failed at bond. It was just kind of a mess. When we did it the right way, we did more and got more for less money in the process and following the process, and we have a successful project. The last couple of times we've done this with the library, many years ago, we did it once. We did the whole RFP process, and then it wasn't followed. And we didn't get the deliverables from the architect whom was hired in their entirety. We did it again a second time, and that was this most recent time. And, we went forth and had a pretty, unfortunately, unsuccessful vote, but a very successful pre-bond plan all put together. The police station is a good example, too. We started to set this up, but then the town decided not to follow it. A lot of money has been spent on that, and where is it? It's, nowhere. So that's the reason why we as the NBC have been really trying to make sure or put this process together and get everybody to follow it, because there's a reason why it works. And, speaking from professionally, both Paul and I, who are on the NBC, obviously, but, we've done this with countless schools in, New York State and Connecticut. We do this for a living. And that's why, there's a way to get a successful bond. There's a way to get a successful pre-bond. It's following this process. And more than anything, it protects us as the owner in town to receive everything to get us to a point to move forward. So it's not just hiring somebody to hire them and say, oh, could you show us, and not really getting our money's worth. That's the danger of not following the process. So any questions so far, or any
No.
avenues to go to on?
I feel like following the process is pretty important based on what you just said. You really nailed that home, Josh. Could we go through sort of the from the very beginning to like, where does the NBC get involved? You said that you work with us on the RFP process. So when exactly do they get involved? And then how much? Sorry.
Yep. Oh, no. So short from the very start. And it's actually written in the charter that way, and for a reason. But so, essentially, as you kind of did, you reach out to us and say, hey, we're going to kick up this library project again. We say, great. All right. What's our end goal? And now this is where you guys take a much larger role in terms of, okay, what are you trying to do? What's your end goal? Let's not beat around the bush. Obviously, we know the library is a contested item with certain groups in town. Unfortunately, that's the case. So in our case, it's going to be, or I'll say your case, it's going to be, okay, what is the first selectman going to back? What is the Board of Finance going to back? Where do we go from here? That's kind of like your bag, your dealings, and everything like that. What we do, meaning the embassy with you, is try to help find that successful avenue. So as an example, it could be like, okay, you know what? We looked at this how long? It was like 3 years ago now, right? The last studies or so.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we did all that then. I'm sure things have changed, especially this day and age. So, right. So now it's like, okay, you know what? Let's take a step back, reorganize our thoughts. We have an architect already on board helping us do that, or that we would. That's what that RFP is for. So we would write an RFP. Maybe it's only for, I'll say what we call like pre-bond services, meaning like, and even just a portion of them. So we did this with the school as an example. We hired tech and architects to take a look at our existing facilities, to go through our scope needs, go through our program needs, and then come up with, a variety of feasible options. And I know Debbie was involved with that at great lengths too. And I'm sure she can, either recall or there's suppressed memories of like option 6A, B, going through dozens and dozens and dozens of options and their cost proposals of which way to go. And that's where your board takes like the primary role of deciding what is the best avenue that we want to put forward. So it could be, again, let's say it's, okay, you know what? It seems like the best chance we have and best scenario we have is we take center school, we knock down half of it, build new here, leave this portion standing, Parks and Rec can use that. That's what we want to go forth with. And the architect is responsible for not only laying out all those options and doing cost proposals, but to kind of put together that, I'll say, schematic plan, that idea, and present it with you to the Board of Ed, to the Board of Finance, to see if this is a viable project. So that's kind of like phase one. Then there's phase two of pre-bond. Now, we usually split it up into two, because there's no sense in doing there's no sense of doing a lot of work if this isn't going to get off the ground. So we could have them design, a $50 million library. Well, you know what? It's just not going to happen. We all know that. But let's say we really want that. Well, maybe we only spend like $10,000, let's say, of their services to do all the legwork up front. And if it's going to go forward, then they continue with the second half of that phase. That second half is kind of everything everything up to the bond vote. So everything like Doyle Coffin did in your last go around, all the meetings, all the planning, all the preliminary plans, the cost estimates, everything, that's all pre-bond services to get you up to that bond vote. And then once the bond passes, then you're entering a new phase post-bond, which is, the contract for the preparation of the documents for construction. So it's a multi-phased, avenue or a street that you go down. And what we like to do in these RFPs is really break it apart so that you're not pigeonholed into either A, sticking with the same person throughout the entire thing if, you just end up not having a great working relationship. B, you don't spend an extraordinary amount of money. I mean, there's no reason to spend or sign a contract for 40, 50 grand if they're only going to do $5,000 worth of organizational work at the beginning. And then, so this way it breaks it up, and then you can choose how far to go and when we go. And, if we're gaining traction, the town's supporting this, we have an avenue, then they get hired for the next phase. Okay, it keeps going. Everything's going great. Then they get hired for the next phase. So it kind of breaks it off and limits the town's exposure, or your exposure with the payables that way. So within that, your board, your constituents are intimately involved. Just like before, I'm sure, all the meetings that you had with, and I'm going to just reference them because it's easiest, with Doyle Coffin for the last project, that's kind of like you would go through that again to develop that right plan. The biggest thing, obviously, is what is this town going to support? And I think that's a different topic, different conversation. So we can pause on that for now, but I'm just going down your list here too. But really, because there's a lot of questions like, well, who decides if it's better to do this or that, or, and like knock down center school or this and that. The real answer is all of us, primarily your group though. So again, you guys are program. The architect that's hired is the one that organizes program. The MBC at this stage is just purely logistics, nuts and bolts. And, we're basically making sure that the architect gives you what you paid for. We are part of the conversations, but it's not our library. It's not our program. We just want to make sure that, we'll tell you, just like we did at the schools, okay, you know what? Enrollment's going up. We need to plan for this because we need to make sure it's successful. In this case, we could say, okay, for the library, for example, we could say something along the lines of, I don't know, hey, look, you know what? I don't know if we necessarily agree with it's only going to cost $150 a square foot to renovate this building. Like, we've done studies on this. We know what it is. You're going to need to do this, that, and the other thing. Let's carry $300 a square foot, whatever it be. So it's purely nuts and bolts. It has nothing to do with program and what you guys want. That all comes from you. Let's see. How is the architect selected? That is typically a combination. So like we did last time, we have what we call a QBS system, qualifications-based selection. And that's essentially a avenue. We've done it with the library before. We did it with Parks and Rec. We did it with the school architect. It basically is kind of like a score sheet, if you will, of everybody that we interview. Now, anybody can submit a proposal. Let's say we get 15 proposals. Well, we're not going to interview 15 people. We could shortlist it to 4 or 5, let's say, interview them and kind of go through it. And then we all sit around the table like we did last time, score them. Who did we like? Who do we don't like? If we even go to a second round of interviews, we do that to make sure we're choosing the right person. So really, it's a collaborative effort of how the architect's selected. Let's see. And what entity determines which design options? That would be, again, collaborative, but primarily you guys, meaning the board, the library board. So that would be, you guys set the program, and it is the architect's job to deliver that program and provide cost estimates to it. And then once, you have these conversations amongst yourselves and say, okay, this is what we really need. Here's the price tag. That seems feasible. Everybody's, kind of feeling good. This is what we're going to put forward. So it's really your determining factor of what you need, how you want to do it, how much, what the projected costs are, and that's what gets put forward. Now, obviously, there are many conversations prior to the Board of Finance or Board of Selectmen seeing this for the first time with that to make sure that everybody's comfortable with it. That way, again, we can have a successful project.
Josh, quick question for you. With knowing that we did all of this legwork 3 years ago, and we assume that we're going to be able to use some of what was produced by Doyle
Sure.
Coffin in our next design of a new library. We're kind of like a cart and a horse situation in that we don't know how much it's going to cost for those pre-referendum services or pre-bond services, I think you just called them. But so how do we get a correct number into our capital budget?
Sure. So that actually comes from the RFP. So what we would do is we would outline with you exactly what services we need. So let's just say, for example, it's review all the existing documentation and update it, right? No cost proposals, no feasibility studies, nothing like that. It's just review. It's just programming. We're just going to do programming. Now, that could be like part A of the proposal that the architects submit. Part B could get into feasibility and costs and stuff like that. This is why we like to break them apart, and it's almost important to, because then you can, again, you have these stop gaps of how far you take things. So once we get those proposals back, that's your number. So let's say it's going to be $5,000 for, reviewing all program and setting up a program with you. Then, architect, Joe Smith architect, we love them. They got the right mindset. Their cost it wasn't the cheapest, but you know what? They weren't the highest either, but that's the right fit. So that's the number that you would propose to carry forward to the town or in for your budgeting.
Are you saying that we would do the RFP prior to being able to put something into our budget, into our capital budget?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Like you should, really, you should do that before you spend any money, because then you know exactly how much it's going to how much it's going to cost, but also more so, you're defining what level of work, what are the deliverables. You're defining what they are going to owe you. You're getting, what for X amount of dollars. And then this way, you have it. Now, with that said, especially now, we're at the end of the year, if you wanted to carry a number, we could help organize that and say, like, okay, you know what, for $10,000, $15,000, somewhere in there, you can get a good amount of pre-bond services, especially organization and whatnot, and excuse me, and then that can even be defined in the RFP. So at least you have something covered in there if timing's an issue. Really, and quite honestly, you at this stage, especially just talking really that first 5 to 10% of the project, you'd probably have better luck, assuming that you had a good working relationship, going to Doyle Coffin and saying, hey, how much would it be? This is what we want to do. It's been 3 years. We want to look at this again. You have all the information. You've done all the work. How much would it be to give us, a couple days worth of time and meetings to update this? You'll probably get it for pennies on the dollar compared to going out to anybody else and have it all done. Now, to move forward from there, we would wholeheartedly, say, no, it's not just blind sign somebody up. Check the pricing. Let's go out with an RFP. But that's going, beyond that first 5-10% of the project.
Yeah. So we already know that we're not going to get any money in our capital budget this coming year. It's more about 22-23's capital budget, which means that we have about a year before we have to put a number into our budget. So, but what I'm thinking is, that kind of thing, maybe we want to start looking at the RFP sooner rather than later.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you have the benefit of time for sure in that case.
So let's run through really quick, Josh, if you don't mind. Let's run through the timeline for an RFP. I remember it taking about 6 months last time. Is that about accurate?
You could do it quicker than that. I'm trying to, typically, and let's see if I can pull it up here.
How long did it take to write? I think did the NBC take summers off? I seem to remember trying to go to an NBC meeting.
Oh no, well we didn't have, we hardly had meetings because we didn't have any active projects.
There were no projects, but I remember trying to get into a meeting and there was no one there.
Let me bear with me 1 second. Let me pull up library RFP. Here it is. Sort by date.
And then I remember the NBC meeting that I went to. You introduced me to the secretary as the person from the town who was going to be monitoring how meeting minutes were taken. She had no idea who I was, really. It was hilarious.
Right. Oh, right. I do know that now. Yeah, we like to have fun at our meetings. We don't. Hey, we may not have candy, but we have fun.
Yeah. There's no more candy anymore at our meetings.
Well, I'm not. Good thing these are all Zoom now. I wouldn't show up without candy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm looking at the last RFP. So I remember we had helped put this together and gave kind of a list of requirements, deliverables, plans. You specify how the selection process works, things like that. And, to do it right, it can be a few months. And really that just depends on let's say there's a month of just internal organization. All right. What are you looking to do with this? So what are our space and facility requirements? What are we looking at multiple sites or multiple buildings? What are the objectives at the end of the day? These are all things that, we defined so the architect can put together, a proper proposal. We also specify what are your deliverables? What are your graphic requirements? Okay, so typical floor plans, or do we have specialty, areas that need to be developed further? Elevations, and or diagrammatic sections, a study model even. So like, you can define what they need to do. And then later within it, kind of the phase two, it's all the nuts and bolts of this is what you're going to be required to do for bond. All the meetings you're going to need to attend, what materials you need to prepare and put together. So that process, just to put this together, it takes, let's say it takes a few weeks, and it's more so it's going to be the organization of your thoughts, the physical writing of it, which we help with and do. We all look at it together to make sure, we're all on the same page. So like the last time we actually defined about how big the building should be, things like that within it. And this time, we can specify, well, we're looking at multiple options and here they are and how that would work. So from there, you put it out and you usually give, architects a couple weeks to respond to it. You can obviously call up certain firms and say, hey, we have an RFP out. Would you like to take a look at it? So you give them benefit of, a couple weeks to put everything together. From that, we usually have a review meeting, and that's where we look at all the proposals together and kind of shortlist them. From there, you have interviews, maybe a second round of interviews. So that whole process, between scheduling and whatnot is another month. So, yeah, I mean, it can be, you could do it as fast as like 2 months. It could be 3 months. You can extend it out. For something like this, depending when you were going to award it, you might wait until a little bit later on, closer to it. You could always put it out ahead of time and you just tell them, just flat out, hey, the contract won't be awarded until 2022 or whatever it is. This is kind of a little premature to do it that long in advance. But, if you plan for it this year, we put it out, you kind of find the right time to put it out. A lot of, come end of fall or so, or really end of summer, you start to get on some lists of, the architects are looking for their biggest production work is over the winter months because not a lot of construction's going on. So that's when we're always prepping for the next building season. So, you can kind of hit some timing right, probably get some better pricing even, and, it could fall right into your plan.
Okay, so month one is when we get ourselves together internally, right? And then actually the physical writing of the RFP. Then month two would be posting it and waiting for architects. And that's a 2 to 4 week process from what I remember.
Yeah, we're all going to wait till the night before anyways to put it together. So
yeah.
But no, yeah, you generally if you give 2 to 4 weeks, usually 3 weeks, 4 weeks it's comfortable. Again, it depends how much interest there is with something like the the school. There's a lot of school architects out there. We had, I think 15 or so proposals, maybe. I think with the library last time we had a good,
we had like 28,
8 or
I
9,
think it
right?
was.
Yeah,
28.
I thought it was 8 or 9.
It was wild. There were a lot of people who responded. So then that second month, you're waiting for architects to actually respond. Then in month 3 is when you start reviewing. And I think it took us about 2 weeks to get through all of the 28 architect proposals that we had received. So that's month 3.
Yeah,
so now we're in month 3.
What we'll typically do there is, so you say, okay, so there's, let's say 10 members on your board, and then there's a couple of us and one for record. So, you say, okay, give us 15 proposal or 15 copies of a proposal. Or, at this day and age, it's easier to say, or, just give us 4 copies and a digital copy on a thumb drive or something like that. And then this way it's easier to be distributed to everybody. And then you can do it multiple ways. A lot of what we've been doing in the past, especially just because there's just so much information, is, okay, you know what? Here, members of the board, here's everything. Let's all take 2 weeks, kind of thumb through it ourselves. Put a list together of your top 3 or top 5, whatever it is. And then we all sit down together. We all go through our list. We all go through it. We discuss, and that's where you kind of pick the firms that you would like to interview. Maybe you end up changing it and say, we were planning on interviewing 4, but geez, this 5th one, let's interview all 5. Or you might just say we were going to interview 5, and hey, there's only 3. We all have the top same 3 names. Well, shoot, let's make our night quicker. We're only going to interview 3. So there's no hard, fast rule, but it's just a matter of kind of going through it and then going through it together.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So what I have so far, just really quick, month 1, physical writing, get ourselves together. Month 2, post it and wait for the architects. Month 3 is when the selection committee would then receive the copies of the proposals. And at that point, after about 2 weeks of looking at it themselves, we'll meet as a group and then decide who they want to interview. And then month 4 would be start interviews, right? And then I think we pulled back at least 2 of the groups. We pulled them back twice. So we spoke.
Yeah, we did it. We did a
we
second.
Spoke with
I remember we did it
3 times.
I think we might have. Yeah, I remember we did.
That was like
I know we did a
month
second
4
round.
and month 5, and then actually signing contracts would have been month 6, right?
Yeah, it's gonna take a month to between having legal review it and all that. It's a standard contract. It's pretty simple, but we still go through it, and that's the nuts and bolts. That's where the NBC assists. We go through it we'll have town council look at it for something like this. Look, we've seen enough AAA contracts. We know what we're looking for and do it. They're all standard. But, maybe there's a special provision in there that we need to change or modify. But so we go through that. Then you hire the architect and then get to work.
Yep. So can I interrupt just to be a little clear to everybody? The last selection committee was not the entire board.
No.
It was Christina and I and the library director, Anita, at the time. And I think just Josh and Paul Checo from the MBC. So that made a small coherent group that hopefully represented everybody. And it was the selection committee that recommended, in the end, Doyle Coffin.
Yes, that's correct, and you can do it multiple ways. So, and that's definitely not to be dissuading, but it's almost an easier way to do it because it is a little bit more concentrated. What we did for this school project, because we had so many entities, we had Board of Selectmen, we had Board of Ed, we had Board of Finance, we had the NBC, we had facilities, we had PTA. So what we actually did there is the same sort of thing. Rather than all those boards being involved and all those groups being involved, it was a select couple members from each few. And kind of like what we did in the NBC is we had our own internal meeting, and then and Paul and I sat on both, but then like Paul and I brought forth the NBC's selection. So it wasn't just us two, it was our group. So, if you wanted to do that as a library board, you could always do that too. You could always have, a consensus amongst yourselves, but then 2 members kind of to represent yourselves or whatever it be. I do think it's important because they're going to be kind of first in line on the battlefield that, Yvonne be included for sure as the director. That's always important. And then, like you said, whomever or how many other members you wish to attend. And of course, we'd be happy to attend as well.
Can I jump in with a question? Josh, this is Yvonne.
Sure.
First of all, thank you for spending your time explaining all this to us today. But my confusion, and maybe I'm the only one who's confused, but my confusion on this particular project is in the fact that it's potentially a joint project between 2 departments. So I'm unclear about first steps, and And should it be the library going out and doing this? Or can you just talk about, have you done a project before? Has the MBC done a project before that was across 2 departments or multiple departments?
Oh, absolutely. And we did that with the last library plan, as well as the school. I mean, the school, and we were across like almost every entity in town. But yeah, so really, and that's, again, that's the NBC's role. We're the nuts and bolts. We're the organizer. You know, we, in a nicer way, keep everybody in line, so to speak. And I don't mean it such like that, but I mean it in the sense of, you know, we're the organizational tool. You guys and whatever groups are involved are the program, are the wants and needs and whatnot. So from the start, you know, it would be the NBC that puts out the RFP, but in conjunction with, you know, the library committee, the library board, or you know, the Parks and Rec, whomever it is. But all of us are the ones that, you know, review the architects or review the proposals, do the interviews, have the discussion together. It's a collaborative effort, and that's very important, especially across multiple groups, is to keep it collaborative. And so that's how kind of the processes would work. But from the nuts and bolts side, the RFPs, the contracts, everything like that, that's under the NBC's purview, but we make it a point to have everybody involved throughout the process.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Josh, in our particular case, the library is a little bit out of the gate already, quite a bit out of the gate already, I guess. Where as far as we know, Parks and Rec has nothing. When do we start communicating with them? And how do we get both on the same page?
So that's, yeah, sure. And that's a bit of a different conversation. And I'll say that in the sense that, you know, quite honestly, that's going to come down to, okay, what's this town going to support? And that's the end game. That's the end goal. You know, is it more sellable to the town to include, say, part of Center School for a Parks and Rec program? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Maybe it's more cost effective, maybe it's not. But that's why we have the architect. So really, again, to answer the question, that's where the NBC comes into play, and that's kind of our role. We help do that coordination and from the start. So within that RFP, so we'll go to the library board, we'll go to Yvonne, we'll go to any group that you might want us to go to as well and say, well, what do you need? What are you looking for? Okay, let's develop this together. We'll write it up. If it's in conjunction with Parks and Rec, you know, we'll go to them and say, okay, what's your scope of work? Is it just keep the existing gym and renovate some bathrooms, you know, and the rest is free game? Like, so what's the end goal? But that's, you know, and as this RFP is being written, there are meetings prior and during to have those roundtable conversations. But that's what's important, is to have those conversations and have them together while we're writing the RFP, so it gets in the RFP, and then that way everybody has a clear understanding of what we're trying to do, what we're asking for, because we're hiring a professional to give us some options, but we're directing them where those options should probably be. So it's important to make sure that everybody's on the same page prior to that.
Thanks.
So I have another question, Josh. It's Yvonne again. So my concern would be if we, so I heard you say a couple of things in terms of cost effectiveness and is it more sellable that way, but so let's say that scenario A is we come to the NBC says, yep, let's pull in Parks and Rec and let's go with a sort of a joint project here. Let's find out what their scope is. You give us your scope and we'll write an RFP. And then if I understand it correctly, the architect that is selected to do this pre-referendum or pre-bonding work is going to come up with some cost estimates. And what if the cost to continue it as a joint project is much higher? And so I guess at that point we would have to make the decision as several groups weighing in about whether or not we wanted to move forward with the higher cost, thinking that maybe it's a more sellable project to the town if both entities were included, or if we want to lower the cost and make it just a library project.
Exactly. And to kind of correlate that, and an easy way to explain it, or an example would be the recent school project. So the architect looked at, okay, kind of, let's say we just renovate these existing schools. Let's say we do renovate and do an addition on the existing school. Let's say we bought new land and put a school on it. Let's say we use town-owned land, put a school on it. And so all those have a variety of different costs. Those are all looked at, side by side, and there's pros and cons to each one besides the monetary value or cost. And just like your project will have pros and cons besides monetary costs. But so everything's looked at, across an even playing field, and then it's decided what is the best avenue going forward. Those decisions could be for a variety of things. So, for the school, it was, well, there's no other really good suitable land to build this on except for Happy Landings, and we're not going to take the open space away. We really can't use an existing school and remodel it because it's, you might as well spend the extra $10 million and have a brand new school. So, there's a variety of things that can come into play. But yes, that's exactly right, Yvonne. You digest everything, review everything, and pick the best avenue forward. If it happens to be, the best avenue is for the library to do its own thing, and this is what we're going to do, and it's the most cost-effective way, but it also gives us the most bang for the buck, that's what we want to go forward with. Great. If it happens to be, there is so much more approval and good connotations for this project, especially with Parks and Rec involved, and we're putting in a town swimming pool. You know what? That's the avenue that, you could choose to go. So it's all reviewed and looked at and then decided amongst, everybody involved really and it comes down to what is the most successful option and best chance for having a successful project.
And it sounds like it's Yvonne again. I'm guessing you don't have a visual, right? You're on the phone.
Yes.
Okay. So that's why I keep identifying myself. So
okay.
So at that point, when let's say the RFP goes forward, the MBC has brought everyone together, Parks and Rec, library, we do the RFP, we've got our architect. The architect then comes back and says, here's your 7 options that you can do. And it sounds like that's the point where we want buy-in from the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, so that we're not going to them and saying, look, we made this decision, we're just telling you. We're saying, here's the options, let's talk about the pros and cons. Is that the point where we bring in the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance?
Quite honestly, that's up to you guys. That's what I would do. And for the sole purpose of, essentially saying, what are you guys willing to support? And here's what we get for our money for each option. We had the same conversations with school, and it was, it's a big number, $78 million. And, it was like, is that sellable to the town? Will that pass a vote? And those conversations are had. The same will be for the library, and as it was last time. What's the price tag? Where's the break? Make or break point. But those conversations will be had. I think it's wise to include the Board of Selectmen and even if it's a sit-down meeting kind of behind closed doors, if you will, but with the Board of Selectmen and or Board of Finance. That way, there's no sticker shock, there's no surprise. It's a group effort. Everybody's willing to put it forward and put their name behind it because that's what's going to just help going forward. Now, if you get into a situation where, let's just say, I'll pick on the Board of Finance, says no more than $7 million, and you have an option at 5, but you have an option that just absolutely makes sense at 8.5. Well, then you can duke it out a bit, and it's worth duking out a bit. And that's where, it can, just like last time, it can get sticky and muddy and whatnot, but it's at the end of the day, meaning the NBC's perspective, and it's always been, what is the best for the town long term? I was a huge supporter of the last library project because I think the town needs it. It's a shame it didn't go forward, and for a variety of reasons. But it's kind of like you fight that fight if we need to when we get there. But having people involved at the beginning, especially when it comes down to finances, is a good option, a good way to go. So yeah, that's definitely something that I would recommend.
Thank you.
This is Alice Carolyn. I like simple steps so that I understand what we're supposed to be up to. Is initially, should we on the library side worry about programs, what we want in there, and meet with various subgroups, constituents, to see what they want, come up with all that information, and then get back to the building committee and meet with you and let you guide us through the rest of what we're asking for as far as Center School is concerned. Okay, so that we're focusing now, like the next 6 months, on developing program-specific requirements, wishes, and dreams.
Exactly. Yeah, that would absolutely be worthwhile. And like I would say, I'm sure you have, the last go. And I understand I'm guessing it's probably changed. If how dramatic, I don't know. But basically take all that pre-work you did a couple of years ago and cross out stuff that doesn't apply, or add stuff that does, or modify stuff that needs to be modified. But yeah, that would be a great step, because the more information you have together, the more thorough and direct we can, make this RFP, and that just helps define the services even that much more, which generally gives you better pricing. So once we do that, then the architect's going to basically take that list, have the same meetings and same groups, and help organize it as well as fit it into these program options. So by all means, doing that precursor work is definitely, worthwhile.
And so for us right now, is there any benefit to our even worrying about Park and Rec? Or should we just focus on what we're looking for?
I would just focus on what you're looking for at this time. Yeah, just worry about the libraries program, and then when it comes time to developing the RFP, that's where it'd be more of a townwide discussion of, okay, and even with the first selectman's office and whatnot, but what's the best, what's our plan of attack here? What's our end goals? What are we exploring? Again, I'll go back to the correlating with the schools. Our goal at that point, or our direction at that point, was everything's on the table. That means new sites, that means buy-in sites, that means maybe taking away open space, that means knocking down schools, or just building onto schools. So it's like everything's open, and we're going to explore every avenue. Maybe yours is, okay, we're only going to look at Center School, or we're going to look at the existing building and Center School, or we may look at it just by ourselves, or we're looking at it with Parks and Rec. So that's a discussion that, can be had later. But if you have all your ducks in a row, then you'll be prepared and ready to go.
Okay, thank you.
Josh, it's Yvonne again. That was a good clarification on that. So So we should do as much of the advanced work on revising the program as we can, but part of the architect's RFP, if I heard correctly in the beginning, was going to be to update the program so they'll get a consultant typically, or at least that's how they did it last time, to work with us to develop the library program document. And
Exactly. Yep, exactly. They'll take your list, work with you, and give their input. Hey, this is what we're seeing, become a trend, or this is what's worked well before, or, oh, I never thought of doing it like that. Okay, that's a good idea. I'll save that one for my next client. So yeah, exactly.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Josh? The only thing that is still kind of sticking with me is the park and rec thing, because it's such a huge thing. I think that people are going to be very curious about it. And if we wait, I understand the MBC is supposed to get everyone together. The only thing that I struggle with is if we get to a point where we are 100% set to go and can go out to RFP, is Park and Rec not going to be tied to us at all? Like they're not going to work with the same architect, even though it's the same site?
No, so this is the culture we've been trying to change in this town. And there aren't these little pet projects, and you don't just go hire somebody and do what you want to do. There's a reason why you don't do that, because it doesn't typically work out well at the end of the day. Again, when we're developing, you obviously have a project. It may or may not include Parks and Rec. The RFP will most likely, I will say, kind of include to explore that option. So not only, it's not to say that we need to decide that Parks and Rec will have space in this building or not. It's meant to say part of the scope of work for the architect is to explore that and explore it in multiple ways. So, it could be, knock down half a center school, leave the gym, and we're going to put parking in between, and on the other side, it's a new library. So maybe that's the best answer. The point is that within the RFP, it's defined that this could be an option. Not that it will be, not that it must be, but it could be. And then that's where, it really comes back to that townwide discussion of, okay, we've got these cost estimates, we've got these options, is a potential larger project that serves the needs of Parks and Rec and the library better to put forward to the town, or do we just focus on the library? Or do we, choose that one in between that is really for the library but has some benefits that, could work for other entities in town? So that's kind of like where all that ties into play. It doesn't need to be a hard, fast decision now. It just needs to be kind of like earmarked that it will be explored.
Okay, explored. But Park and Rec, I know I'm being difficult, but Park and Rec would be part of that process because it would be their program that is being explored, right?
Right. So the architect would meet with them, look at their existing facilities, look at what are your needs, what are your wants, what are your wish lists, are they just looking for indoor rec space? Are they looking for a brand new office building for themselves? So that's where, again, it's the architect's job to kind of sort through all that and come up with a viable logistic plan that meets budget.
Okay.
So just because they ask for it doesn't mean they get it. And that goes for you too, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, we know. We know. Okay. Were there any other questions for Josh? Okay. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
No, absolutely.
Thank you.
And if, if you guys, round table afterwards and say, oh, I wish we asked, Paul and I are always here. So for better or worse, we're always here. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
You guys are like an old married couple. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Josh.
Absolutely.
Appreciate
Take care.
it. Okay. You
Bye.
too. Bye-bye. Okay, so any initial thoughts on that? I felt that it was very helpful that he jumped on. The thing
was
that
excellent.
still um, it sticks in my brain a little bit is the Parks and Rec thing but it sounds like the architect would go to them anyway, but the majority of the project, regardless of what is chosen from the Center School Ad Hoc Committee's report, the majority of the project is the library project anyway. Okay, any thoughts? Anyone want to bring anything up?
I think actually the architect, if you choose an architect by RFP, unless it says in the RFP that there's a possibility that Parks and Rec will be part of this, the architect is not going to go talk to them. Because the RFP says this is what we are paying you to do and nothing else. So we do have to settle that kind of question. This was very helpful, but it's also not the kind of question in the end that the Municipal Building Committee decides. It's in some ways we're sort of lost still in what does the Board of Selectmen think about the Center School report? What are they going to do about it? Other than that, I mean, I think that they're very helpful. They were very helpful the last time in coming up with the RFP and going through that process. And I'm sure that they are just as helpful with a much larger project for the schools. But I think that that's the way that we need to approach the RFP. Is what we're looking for is somebody to, assuming the Board of Selectmen says that we can use the Center School property, then you have to craft an RFP that says what we want to know is, what does that mean? Should we split it up? What are the advantages of splitting it up, not splitting it up, tearing down all of it, having the library wind up with something, so that just like the schools, you wind up with a whole series of options that you can choose, and then narrowing it down to the one or two, and then maybe going to the Board of Selectmen. Although I was a little leery of his comment about a closed door session with the Board of Selectmen, which I do not think you can have. In this case, it's not buying property, which is, I think, the only real estate reason you can have closed door meetings. But that's just a minor matter at this point. But so I think that the MBC will be very helpful when we get that far.
Well, the first step is that the Board of Selectmen have to decide what to do. And until that happens, we don't really have a firm direction. But in the meanwhile, there were two key things that we can do. And one is to get out the pre-work that was done before and see what we can use from that. The biggest thing that we can do right now is the program, and that falls on Yvonne. Us, but Yvonne figuring out what do we want in the new, in the whatever happens, let's say the next, the new library, the renovated, whatever it is, what do you want to have happen in there? And that's.
I would tell you that the Strategic Planning Committee is.
Well, that's certainly part of it, but also the space needs study is something that's been worked and then recently reworked also.
Right,
so I
but
think that's a big piece.
But you have to specify, what do you want? Like, how many meeting rooms do you want? How many do you want a dedicated sewing room? Anything that needs specific requirements, that's what you do. And you meet with all sorts of little subgroups who might want space in the library as well, so that your program is not just Yvonne saying, here's what we want, but a whole bunch of people saying, here's what we think should be in there. So you put that together, then eventually you go back to the municipal building committee, and it's their problem what happens with Park and Rec. It really isn't ours at this stage. The critical thing for us is, what do you want to do with whatever space you have? So, rather than spinning your wheels and worrying about, well, what about if they don't, Park and Rec isn't ready, that's not our problem. All we can do at this point is work on the program that you want and really solidify that, which I'm not sure we've done specifically, but if we have, that's great. But otherwise, that's certainly something Yvonne can start to tackle. And then eventually the RFP will be put out, and the municipal building committee and the selectmen will decide a lot of what's put out with our input. So,
No, we recommended, this selection committee recommended which architect we would hire, and that's who got hired. So it really is, I mean, yes, the Board of Selectmen, because they sign contracts, but it really was not, they did not participate in the selection.
No, I keep talking about program. What do you want to have happen? And we're jumping all over the place as if it's going to be our building and we get to decide all this stuff. We really don't. It really becomes a town project very, very soon, but you decide what you want in there and clearly delineate it. And that's probably already in the prior pre-work that was done.
I was just going to say, I think the space needs study already covers a lot of that. And then any of the work that was just done with 4D Designs, that was an update of the space needs study. Right. I think what we're lacking is sort of that 3 levels of, this is what we need to have, this would be nice to have, and this is our wish list.
Right.
Because ultimately we're going to need that for the architect. And I think that that's something that could probably be worked on, in the next 6 months, right? If we're talking about the next 6 months of work.
Right. And we all know not much is going to happen until after the next referendum anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, just being realistic. So I think the big thing now is
the next election. The next election. Yeah. And actually that leads us into our next thing, which was the discussion with Steve Dunn, which it's after 2:00. So I was going to try to keep this to an hour, but we were just going to talk really quickly about the discussion with Steve Dunn. And really what it came down to was that there's not a whole lot that's going to happen before the next election, before the next capital budget. It's not going to be in this capital budget. It would be potentially in the following capital budget. But then some of what Josh talked about was really important, knowing that we do have to put out the RFP before we can even get it in our capital budget, knowing that we may not even get the money in our capital budget, which is a little wild to think about, to put out that RFP saying we could potentially hire in July of 2022. But by the way, we don't know if we have that money.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's the way it's going to be. And it will be until until the school project is closer to finished and we actually know how much it's going to cost. I mean, so, we've had estimates, but, sometime around the beginning of the 2022 fiscal year, we'll be near the end of that, and we'll actually know how much it costs, which gives us some idea about how much the town can afford. And the town then is willing to afford also, because it becomes partly a matter of, okay, now we know the exact impact on our property taxes. So what are we going to be more willing to support?
So right now, really, it keeps coming back to what can you do, and what are you just spinning your wheels and getting all excited about that you can't affect at all. So right now, getting program really solidly defined and then coming up with options as well of what you would also might like to have. That's really the big thing to start to focus on. And then
But-
what happened last time.
But you can also focus on at least looking at the last RFP
Yes,
and saying, well, and a lot of it will be not appropriate because it will need expansion. So we need to look at what this committee thinks we need out of an RFP.
Right.
What do you expect to be the outcome? And start defining the things that you would like to see come out of it. Which, you know, so it's, you know, what would it cost? What are the pros and cons of option A, which is keep the building and just gut it and start over again, tear it down.
but see, we don't have to worry about that because that's going in the RFP. That's not our problem right now.
Yes, it is. Well, it's the fact that you want that as an outcome of the RFP.
Right, but see, we keep spinning our wheels, going all over the same stuff over and over again. The only thing we can control right now is what are we proposing goes into that building? What do you want the program to be? What do you want to offer? Forget
Yes,
the
that's very
design, forget
but
all that other stuff.
But that the outcomes of how you're going to manage that are also important. And you have to, so don't put that off until the very end, because the reason is you tend to forget the more times you look at it. So yes, the program has to be up to date,
Right,
but also we need to know what we expect out of hiring somebody for what, $75,000 to $100,000. We spent 125 over 2 fiscal years the last time. So my guess is that's going to be pretty close to what it will cost us again. So for that amount of money, what kind of answers are we buying? Do we want?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Josh was talking about a phase 1 and phase 2 so that we don't like blow everything out in phase 1. I liked the idea of that also, in that maybe our phase 1 is simply, you know, to define what can be done with the space versus, you know, tying the 2 projects together and that sort of thing. And then have the pre-bond services in that phase 2 of, and then that also kind of gives a little bit more, you know, maybe maybe the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance will feel a little bit better about it if they get that information first, right? If they get that information first, and then we pull the trigger on phase 2. Betsy, do you have a copy of the old RFP? Because I don't know that I do, but my guess is you've got it like in your back pocket.
I don't know that I do, but my guess is the next place to ask is the purchasing agent.
Right.
Because
it should be a town
yeah.
hall.
Unfortunately, yeah. And I'm sure that he would have it. Actually, you know what? I'll reach out to him and see if I can get a copy of that.
Didn't
The
Josh
last
say
one that
that
was done.
Didn't Josh just say that he had it? Was that what he? wasn't
Yeah,
he-
I think he was looking at it.
Maybe he can
So
just
yeah,
send
I
it
can
to me.
I can ask Josh. That's
Yeah.
a good point. And just, you know, we can take a look at that. But it's definitely feels like a bit of spinning of wheels and back and forth. But we have another meeting at the end of our mid-January, and what we can do is we can all review the RFP if we have before then, and then we can talk about the program. And Yvonne, you have the space needs. I know I do too, actually. The old space needs study, but you would know what's been updated by 4D Designs. Maybe you can forward that out, you know, what what was changed in the space needs, so that we can all kind of take a look at that.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. The other, if I could just sort of summarize for my own organization in my head what everybody's been talking about. So I think what Alice was saying and what Betsy was saying all makes a lot of sense, in that we actually have, I think, a good time frame here, because if we take from January to June, let's say, and during that time, because a lot of the work of reaching out to these groups to get information about what they would like to see in their community is going to be done on the strategic planning committee. If we take that information and update the library program, the former library program, and if we give ourselves sort of January to June to do both of those things, get the strategic plan done and update the program, and the strategic plan, of course, informing the program. Then if we go from, say, June to whatever, August, and work with the MBC on an RFP, and they will decide to pull in Parks and Rec or whatever they do. And the RFP is asking for a phase 1 and a phase 2, the phase 1 delivering all the different options, so that by the time it comes to next year at this time, we will be able to go to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance and say, these are the options that exist. Let's start talking about which one to put forward. And we haven't activated phase 2 of the RFP, because we're doing that if we're moving forward with one of the options after we have brought in the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, right?
No, I unfortunately think that, I mean, we're going to be asked to propose a capital budget to cover the RFPs and process and services, but it will be this time putting it into the 2022 capital budget. So we are going to spend, I think, most of a year without any money, and then 6 months. I mean, if we can get it into the capital budget in this time, 2021, it will go into effect July 1st, 2022. And so that's the fiscal year we're talking about having money to spend on an architect. And Steve was pretty insistent on that timing, primarily to coincide with knowing what the costs of the school were, and that he would be more confident at that point, which means that, frankly, things are going to slow down.
Right.
Well, I wonder if because I know that the town's going to have to start answering questions about what's to become of Center School, especially when it's vacant. As Kevin mentioned last time, they're not going to want an empty building sitting, in town. I wonder if we could, if it really is only $10,000 to $15,000 for this phase 1 piece, I wonder if that's worth bringing back up to Steve and saying, if that piece of it, if phase 1 of that RFP were to be done, in other words, putting it into this budget right now that we're going to be proposing for the capital budget, which will be approved in May and take effect July 1, if just phase 1 of it, the $10,000 to $15,000 piece, can be accomplished so that it can provide the options for them to start considering, so that the phase 2 piece of the RFP will go forward in the following year, as you said.
Well, I don't know. We actually did bring up the question of what happens to Center School in the once the schools leave at probably July of 2022. I think that's the plan. the building has to be maintained at a cost of, I think what Steve said, 75,000 was what they figured it would cost for a year's maintenance. And of course he said, and we'll just charge that to the library budget. Luckily he laughed. It's actually a town cost. But yes, it is something that will occur. And my guess is they're probably looking at least 3 years of that.
So
Yes.
so the building will be sitting empty for at least 3 years, center school?
Yeah, but they are, it sounds like they are going to maintain it. They're going to keep the heat on, that sort of thing. And I think Steve mentioned at some point that Parks and Rec may use the gyms to run some programming. I wonder if that opens the option for us to, or for the library to potentially run some programs out of there also. If, you know, if you have a great need for space, if that's an option at all. I'm not saying, you know, that classrooms are the best option for library programs. However, knowing that you don't have any space now, is that something that maybe you want to explore?
But if you start accepting it as is, they'll be like, oh, so you're fine with it as is.
Very good.
I would say that if you started, if you started running
expect.
programs in there, people would go, oh my God, like we need decent space for programs, right?
Well,
because it actually shows the need. Because right now, you guys are doing a fantastic job with the space you have, right? It's
Yep.
just a thought.
Well, I
It's
think
just
there
a
is a
thought. I'm not
danger-
saying that you should, you know, move into it as is, or it doesn't need anything. But I am saying that if there's space and if that's an option, then perhaps that's something to explore.
I think Mary has a good point in that, you know, people will say, okay, done, project done, that they can just have it as is. But the other piece to that is if Parks and Rec is going to begin, if they do end up using the gym or some of the classrooms for their programs, and if the library does not do that, there is a little bit of a sense of ownership then on the part of Parks and Rec. And then, you know, I feel like we would be losing an opportunity then to kind of, you know, stake our claim and say we need this space. Because we all know, you know, possession is whatever, 9/10 of the law. So, you know.
Or we could stake the claim with like storing the books there for Friends of the Library sales and things like that.
But stake some kind of a claim would be important. If the building is going to be opened up for use, it's going to be much better if the library says, here's this space that's going to be for the library one way or another, whether it's renovated, torn down, rebuilt, whatever, rather than have other people sort of spill in there and us have to push them out.
yeah, I would think that building will be a mess when they move out. I can't even imagine.
You don't
I'm
think
sure it will be. I'm sure it will be. But I also think that if you're really hurting for space and there's space that's opened up, why wouldn't you take advantage of it? I think it's something to explore.
Well, it is. It's part of a lot of options, with some of which may not come as early as we'd like in life. But maybe we're at least at the point where we're getting closer, and if the Board of Selectmen say the center school property is appropriate for a new library, that corresponds with any numbers of people who've said that to me over a period of time, including while the school was still there and wasn't giving it.
Before there was a school project, I remember hearing that.
Yeah, before there was a school project.
So it's worth exploring. So that's good. Okay, so there was a lot of great conversation. We're almost at an hour and a half, so I'm trying to be respectful of people's time. And I think we can wrap up now. Obviously, we have more to discuss. Frank had agreed to do the update on the discussion with Steve Dunn. So maybe what we could do is tack that onto next meeting. But so our next planned meeting right now is, if I look at my calendar really quick, January, oh no.
I think you said January 14th. That rings a
January
bell.
14th, yes,
Yeah.
at 5 p.m. So
Yeah, that rings a bell because that's a zoning date also.
yeah, I don't, oh no.
Yeah,
I
we're
can't
gonna try
imagine.
to sneak them in between, like the third Thursday of the month, or is that too late to wait till the 21st?
Third Thursday of the month. Oh, I think we were doing it, trying to have our meeting before the next library board meeting.
Right. And in that, trying to stay between the zoning meetings.
Okay.
But
Oh,
let's see if
okay,
we
I
can
see.
get
So
that
you've got a zoning meeting
up with-
that night, huh?
I think
Okay,
there's a
let me-
library foundation at 6:30 that night, the 14th,
Let's see.
because Martin Luther King Day was the 18th.
Hold on, I'm trying to find my calendar.
Library board meets January 27th.
And January 6th. Do not forget.
Right. Are we far enough along in the budget process? We have stuff to talk about.
We have to be. We may not need the January one, but it's there just in case.
Okay, so Mary, you wanna try to push it to the 21st?
Is that okay with people?
That it works fine for me. It works no different.
That's the new
What
library.
time?
5 p.m.
Oh, wait, so this is rather than the 14th.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
5 p.m.
Yeah, it's still before library board. And I know Frank and we have at least 3 public hearings that same night for library, for zoning. So
Oh.
we'll be like, you know.
Bring a
getting ready for all of
sandwich.
those.
Oh. Kevin sent the RFP. Is that?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Great. Okay.
Wow.
Kevin's the best.
Yeah. Way to pull it out of your back pocket. That's
Meeting
good
isn't
stuff.
even over yet. And there's
Betsy,
results.
you're gonna lose your position.
Hey.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So have a happy holiday to everyone who's
You
celebrating.
too. Thank you.
Holidays.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Going to get a
Merry
treat.
Merry Christmas.